Good morning. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Happy Tuesday. Happy 5th of July. We are going to begin with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven in to the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. I have a lovely surprise for all of you this morning. As those of you who used to attend in person know, Miss Bobby Howard is a wonderful poet, beautiful poet. She's been a long time member here. And occasionally, when we used to meet in person, Miss Bobby would come and do a reading of one of her poems. And so I have asked her, as a special surprise to everybody today, come on, Miss Bobby. She's going to do a reading for us, and I'm sure that it will bless you.
I'm going to read a poem about love, peace, and joy. Love, peace, and joy. Pursuing peace and being of one mind is my goal. Be of good comfort with such love and take hold. Trust in God to always see you through. He is a great God that truly cares for me and you. Remember whose you are and never give up. Believe and please know that you are truly enough. Keep an open mind, especially when you think you already know. Walk as sunshine and allow your joy to flow. Remember and know it's not all about you all the time. Please make room for someone else to shine. There will be a time for you to simply empty out, get calm, be quiet, or you just might have to shout. Push back your ego and embrace your I don't know. Love at all times, walk peaceably, and allow your love to show. Always be yourself in and out of every season. Please know that you don't need to be validated by anyone for any reason. Finally, this is my verse for today. Finally, brethren, farewell. Become complete, be of good comfort, be of one mind, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. That's 2 Corinthians 13:11. Thank you.
Beautiful, Miss Bobby. Thank you. I'm going to get my stool settled now. While I'm doing that, though, let me just make a comment. It's interesting how, we always talk about, a lot of times my brother and I will speak about the same thing, or Pastor Lonnie and I will have we'll kind of step on each other's message. And so the first thing I noticed, I did not tell Miss Bobby what I was going to talk about today. And in one of the very first lines of her poem, she said, be of one mind. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. First, our quotes. The first quote by Henry Ford. Coming together is the beginning. Staying together is progress. Working together is success. Next, together, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results. Becca Shuttle. Next, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent. John Donne. Next, from Arthur Potts Dawson, we are stronger as a group than as individuals. Albert Einstein, nothing truly valuable can be achieved except by the unselfish cooperation of many individuals. And lastly, again from Henry Ford, if everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. So I guess we now know why Ford Motor Company has sold more vehicles than any other car company on the face of the earth because its founder strongly believed in the concepts of teamwork and cooperation. So obviously today we're going to be talking about teamwork, and my title is one of the corniest cliches there is, but nevertheless it's true, and it is teamwork makes the dream work. On any good team, sports or otherwise, everyone must play their own unique part. A team full of quarterbacks, even if they're all first-round draft picks, won't win many Super Bowls because you've also got to have team members who do other things. Somebody has to be out there to catch his passes. Defensive players have to protect him while he's deciding who he's going to throw the ball to or block for him if he decides to run with the ball himself. So without elongating this sports metaphor too much more, because I don't know that much about sports, that's my limit, I think you get the point. Every person on a successful team of any kind has their own unique part to play according to their specific gifts and talents. And that principle is true no matter what area of life you choose to apply it to. We're going to be talking more about teamwork in just a moment, but I want to kind of set that idea over to the side for now and lay the groundwork for the specific topic I want to talk about today. Yesterday, of course, was July the 4th, the day that we here in America celebrate our independence from Great Britain back in 1776. On Sunday, the day before the 4th, I chose to wear a dress to church that had a butterfly theme, and it was pink and yellow and green and lavender, rather than the traditional colors of our nation's flag, red, white, and blue. And I didn't do that in protest, per se. Many other people had on red, white, and blue. Reverend David Michael had on especially red, white, and blue. He came to church dressed as Uncle Sam, if you missed that. But I did do that intentionally to make the point that our freedom needs to move beyond our allegiance to and our appreciation of only one country, especially this country, if we want to be spiritually enlightened. So, disclaimer time. I love America. I am grateful I was born here. I am aware that many other countries I could have been born in, I would have had far less freedom and would have had to struggle much more to simply survive. But I think it's dangerous, or to put it a different way, a little narrow-minded, to be blindly patriotic to any country without acknowledging the other side of it, specifically America. I heard a little soundbite of Van Jones speaking yesterday, and here's what he said about the way America began. He said, "The founding reality of America is terrible. Most of the founders were slave owners. They wouldn't even let other men vote unless they were rich enough to own land. Women had zero rights. And at that time, black people and women were basically property. They also killed Native Americans and took their land for no other reason than they wanted to. Even Thomas Jefferson wrote in his personal diary, 'I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just,' which basically meant he thought that God would eventually strike America down for its arrogance. So our founding reality was not amazing. This is a continuation of what Van Jones is saying. But that same man knew what the founding dream was, and also wrote, 'We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women, although he didn't mean that at the time, are created equal.' There's a big gap between the founding dream and the founding reality. And I feel like African Americans and women and other progressive forces have been working throughout every generation to try to close that gap between the ugliness of the reality and the beauty of the dream." End quote. Wow. So that was a lot, what he just said, but it is the truth. And it sheds quite a bit of light on what he refers to as this gap between the beautiful dream of what America could become and what the reality of its actual beginning was. One of the things most Americans hold most dear and mention most frequently when speaking about why they love this country is religious freedom. Many of the colonists initially came to America because they wanted to be free to practice their own form of religion and not have it dictated to them by the King of England through the Anglican Church, which was the state-sponsored religion and church in England at that time, and everything else was actually illegal. Many wars were fought between Protestants and Catholics in that region for thousands of years, and to this day, there is still a lot of religious tension there. That's the entire reason the country of Ireland split in two. There's now the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. One is Catholic, one is Protestant. One is under its own governance, it's its own country, and the other is still a part of Great Britain, the United Kingdom. So back to America. The Puritans were looking for a place where they could be free to worship God in the manner they believed to be right, and that was the sole reason many of them came to America and fought to be free from Mother England. Freedom of religion was of supreme importance to them. That was the dream, which sounds wonderful, right? But the reality was they wanted to be free to practice their version of religion, but were not at all interested in extending that same freedom to anyone who decided to worship differently than they did. They completely rejected the Native Americans' version of spirituality. In fact, they saw them as savages who were barely human. And the different way that the Native Americans viewed and worshiped God is one of the reasons why the Puritans felt, and the first colonists felt justified in killing them and taking their land. They also killed many women and men alike, who they labeled as witches and accused of practicing witchcraft simply for not strictly adhering to their religious values. So, as Van Jones said, the reality of this country's founding was more than a little rough around the edges, but the dream that we could be was, and still is very beautiful. It's just that there's this big gap between them, and we've been working generation after generation, some of us at least, to close that gap. America is still a work in progress, and sometimes, unfortunately, it seems as if we take one step forward and two steps back. A country, just as an individual, goes through its times of darkness as well as its times of enlightenment. So what do we as individuals do when we feel like we're in a time of collective darkness or in a period of social upheaval, which, by the way, precedes every big transition? What's that famous Frederick Douglass quote? We all know the first line of it, but I want to give you the entire thing today. He says, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters." This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. So we've talked before about struggle and how we sometimes choose to struggle when we don't have to, that there is an ease and a flow that should be present in our lives, and how sometimes we get addicted to stress and drama. And all of that is true. But I think that the struggle he is talking about here is in a different context. Instead of struggle here, I would use the word effort. It's a lot like having a baby. For anything new to emerge, to be born, there is an element of effort or work that some might characterize as struggle that's necessary to get the baby through the birth canal. That's the reality of the birth process, not the idealized version of it. A lot of people idealize America, especially in its beginning stages, rather than looking at the reality of it. His quote, Frederick Douglass, also speaks to the nature of duality, that we live with here on this earth plane. He points out that you can't grow crops without plowing the ground and planting seeds. That takes work. If you want the benefit that the rain brings, you have to endure the thunderstorm. The beauty and the majesty of the ocean is accompanied by its loud and mighty roar that sometimes might be uncomfortable to your ears. So the bottom line is, if we want to see change happen, we're going to have to be willing to put in a little work and effort. So many generations of Americans before us have done in the past to bring about change. But it's important that each of us understands that there are many roles to be filled, and that all of us are not going to approach working for this desired change in the same way. We've got to become a team and move like a team and cooperate with each other instead of letting that fact that we all play different roles divide us and feel like we have to compete with each other and that our role is better or more important than your role, or that you have to play the same role I do. I know a lot of people are angry and upset about some recent developments in this country. A few have even called me to talk about it, which is totally appropriate. I am happy to have those conversations. The first piece of advice I gave them, and that I would also give myself, is to be angry and sin not. Now, again, as my brother reminded us on Sunday, there is no such thing really as sinning in the context of offending God. To sin is to miss the mark. It is to fall short of behaving in a manner consistent with our own divine nature. And it doesn't affect God or his love for us. What it does affect, though, is our own quality of life and the lives of those around us. Again, as he said on Sunday, how we choose to use our freedom affects everyone around us and creates the environment that we all must live in collectively. So that's the only sin we encounter. It's the consequences of our actions on ourselves and on our fellow man. So back to my point. My advice to anyone and everyone in times like we are experiencing now is to be angry, but sin not. Don't miss the mark by acting out of your lower, baser instincts rather than from your higher divine nature. Do everything in love. You can speak the truth, you can speak your truth and disagree with someone in love. You can argue your point and even demand what you believe to be your rights in a kind way. Rosa Parks was never unkind, but yet she stood her ground and did not back away from her purpose. We don't have to hate the people we disagree with. That's not going to serve any of us or help us to move forward. But more importantly, and what I want to emphasize today, is you don't have to be upset by the fact that everyone might not choose to fight or struggle or work for change in the same way that you do. Let everyone find their own role. As Jesus told his disciples once when they were upset that other people that they didn't really know well were casting out demons, he said, if they're not against us, they're for us, they're with us. We're all working for the same thing. We just might not all work in the same way, and that's okay. I want to go to some information now that I gave you in an earlier teaching a couple of years ago when we were first beginning to grapple with COVID, and when the incident with George Floyd had sparked the Black Lives movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. We're still dealing with those issues today, perhaps in some ways to a lesser degree, perhaps in other ways not. And there are other issues now that have been added on to the pile that are causing even more discontent and division. We are, as I said last week, being given opportunity after opportunity to choose how we will respond in times of crisis. These crises just keep coming, but with them, so do the opportunities. So just to refresh your memory, I said, quoting Andrew Martin, when you pray for patience, you don't get patience, you get the opportunity to be patient. When you pray for peace, you don't get peace, you get the opportunity to be peace, etc. With any other attribute you can think of, whether it's joy or love or abundance, fill in the blank. So 2 years ago, this is what I said. I said, the events we are watching unfold in our world right now all have the potential of throwing us into fear. But living your life in fear or making decisions and acting from a place of fear is never productive and never accomplishes anything positive. I would add today, acting out of anger, same thing. So I want to read now a piece by Dr. Kim Duramo about how to choose something other than fear. She starts by saying, when you operate from a place of fear, it changes the way your brain, your immune system, your digestion, your endocrine system, literally everything functions. Okay, so as we know, fear is resistance. Fear is contraction. Think about a muscle. When a muscle contracts, it cramps up. And when it cramps up, it can't do its job effectively. I've talked about this before, that athletes, from everything I've heard, I don't consider myself an athlete, but from what I've heard, they always talk about staying loose before they have to compete, because that's the state in which their muscles perform best, not in a contracted, cramped up state. Often you'll see runners, especially runners, shaking out their legs before they run, and that's to keep their muscles loose. So that's the state fear, and I'm going to add today anger, puts us in. Contracted, cramped up, defensive, in resistance. So the opposite of that, the opposite of being cramped up and resistant, is to be resilient. Let's talk about the difference between those two states for a minute. First, let me define resilience for you. It's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, or the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. So resistance causes us to contract into fear. But resilience, the opposite of that, is the quality of us being able to take a hit, as it were, but then quickly recover our balance and equilibrium. So it's not that we never get bent out of shape. It's not that we never get angry, but that we can recover from it quickly. What's happening now on a global scale, now this is back to what Dr. Kim is talking about, is that the virus, but again, this was 2 years ago, so you could fill in the blank of anything, Roe versus Wade, Trump, gun control, racism, whatever you want to put in there, is triggering, all of those things are triggering the fear that we have collectively held for a long time. It didn't create the fear. These things did not create the fear. It has just triggered the state of fear we have all already mostly been living in. But it's also giving us a really beautiful opportunity to choose. Will I live in love or will I live in fear? Will I live in anger or will I live in peace? Will I live in resistance or will I live in resilience? What our mind often tells us is you have to live in fear because what's happening is really not okay. You have to live in fear or else you're just checking out of reality and pretending nothing's wrong. But that's not true. When we are living in love, harmony, serenity, and clarity, we are more, not less, aware of what needs to be done. We are more, not less, capable of taking action that will make a difference. This is the biggest lie that many people have been living in, that they have to be in fear because otherwise they won't take the necessary action. But it is 100% the opposite. When you are living in fear, you are ineffective. You are zapping, and again, add anger to this. You are zapping your ability to take action. And so many people are living in chronic fatigue because of this. You are impairing your power and limiting your access to your source of power. When you drop fear, you also drop your resistance and create resilience. Resilience allows you to be in a place where you can see clearly what action you can take and what it is you're called or inspired to do that will actually make a difference. Okay, I want to stop right here and talk about this. Resilience, or choosing to live in love rather than fear or anger, allows us to discover what it is we are called to do, she says. And sometimes when we use this term calling, we think of it as in terms of a lifelong mission, as in, I feel called to be a pastor or a teacher or a doctor or whatever. And that's certainly one meaning of the word, but there's also a smaller shorter term meaning, as in what you're called or inspired to do in a particular situation or in this moment. And we're not all going to be inspired to respond in the same way. And that's okay. Again, a few weeks ago, now this was back in 2020, I said a few weeks ago I read a piece by a woman who was talking about there being various ways to approach the whole issue of the virus and social distancing and whether or not to wear a mask when you leave the house or whether to leave your house at all or not. And she was saying that we need to stop making people wrong who choose a different path than us, a different way of responding to it than we do. She was urging people to do what's right for them, but to leave room for others to do what they feel is right for them and to stop all the judgment. And I believe that's also true when it comes to people protesting or speaking out or choosing not to about any subject, whether it's Black Lives Matter or Roe v. Wade or gun control or any of the myriad things we're facing now. I've seen a lot of people posting quotes that say the famous one by Dr. Martin Luther King, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And I agree to a certain extent, but I also know that there's a lot of power in silence at times. And some people even feel called to silence. That is their calling. And it doesn't mean they don't care about what's happening or that they don't have an opinion or that they're not supportive. It just means that at this time, they don't feel they have anything productive or new to add to the conversation. I remember saying a couple years ago that at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was probably time for people who look like me to just be quiet. And it's not my job to take the lead on that because it's people of color's lead to take the lead on that. So there's so many reasons that sometimes people stay silent. There's also already so much noise around all of these issues that it's okay for some people to just decide to stay quiet. Everyone has a different role to play. Now, I also gave this example. You can throw rocks into the water two different ways. You can take a rock and just throw it directly in the water and it makes a big splash and then it goes down to the bottom. Or you can take a rock and skip it and it kind of lightly goes across and it just makes little ripples out. In the end, the splash is still there and those two rocks are still at the bottom of the lake. So however you get the rock there is up to you. I saw a post on Instagram by a young woman, and she goes by, her Instagram name is Empress Raven, and I've actually met her once. She's a friend of mine. And what she posted in the wake of all that was happening at the time deeply resonated with me. So obviously, as you can tell at that point, I was talking about the Black Lives Matter protest. And this post of hers specifically addresses that, what was happening then. But the principle remains the same no matter what it is, no matter what crisis it is we're facing. So this was her post. It was a list of the different roles and their descriptions that you can play in the midst of a crisis. The first, she said, is weavers. And this is what the weavers say. See if you can pick out what you're most called to do in this list. I create lines of connectivity between people, places, organizations, ideas, and movements. So these are the weavers that connect things together. I was telling Miss Bobby right before we started that one person who called me a couple of weeks ago, very upset about things that were going on, I said, you know what, she wanted to do something. I said, well, I know this other woman over here that's been a member of our church for years, and she's already got this established program that she does. Let me connect you to. And that was my job. My job wasn't to go do what they were doing. My job was to have the information that, hey, you want the same thing she wants. Let me connect the two of you because you don't know each other. So that's weavers. Next, experimenters. I innovate, pioneer, and invent. I take risks and course correct as needed. Okay, so those are the people that are kind of throw caution to the wind. And they just kind of those are the people that get the plane in the air and then figure out how to fly it once they're there. Next, frontline responders. I address crises by marshaling and organizing resources, networks, and messages. All right, so we got to have our frontline responders. Next, visionaries. I imagine and generate our boldest possibilities, hopes and dreams, and remind us of our direction. I think the founding fathers would probably fit into that category. They had a dream. They didn't execute it perfectly, but they did have a wonderful dream. Next are builders. I develop, organize, and implement ideas, practices, people, and resources in service of the collective vision. So we already are seeing the connection. The builders wouldn't have anything to build if the visionaries didn't have a vision for what was supposed to be built. Next are caregivers. I nurture and nourish the people around me by creating and sustaining a community of care, joy, and connection. So all these people that are out on the front lines, all these experimenters who are out there all day on the edge, when they come home, they got to have somebody to take care of them, to say, what do you need? You're hungry, you're tired, you need a bath. You need to remind them of the practical things in life. Okay, next we have disruptors. I take uncomfortable and risky actions to shake up the status quo, to raise awareness, and to build power. So you always got to have those disruptors. But everybody's not going to be a disruptor, and the disruptors can't be mad at the people who want to be quiet. Next are healers. I recognize and tend to the generational and current trauma caused by oppressive systems, institutions, policies, and practices. So important. Everybody has to have a place to go and heal, and you got to have somebody to facilitate that. Next, storytellers. I craft and share our collective stories, experiences, history, and future potential through art, music, literature, and movement. Beautiful. We have to have art as and stories as our inspiration, and to keep our history alive so that we'll know where we've been, so that we can more clearly see where we want to go. Lastly, guides. I teach, counsel, and advise using my gifts of discernment and wisdom. So I'll run through that list really quickly again without the explanations. We got weavers, experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, builders, caregivers, disruptors, healers, storytellers, and guides. And there's where her list ends, but there are many more roles each of us can choose to play. After the list, she simply wrote this: please remember, everyone is assigned a different role and all are valid. Some are on the front line, others are holding space, and there are even those who are transmuting the energy. Some people are spreading the information and providing facts. All are very important roles. In any production, there are many more people working behind the scenes doing jobs that can't be seen than there are on the stage. Excellent. So when I read that, I thought about the fact that the Apostle Paul said something very similar. He said it like this in Ephesians 4. Therefore, I, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. All right, time out. I want to insert this here. I think we actually need to move from tolerance to celebration. And if you think I'm blaspheming by adding or changing adding to or changing the scripture, then you've also got to take issue with everyone else who has ever offered a different translation from the original, which technically they're all translations unless you want to learn how to speak Aramaic and go back to that. Personally, I believe what needs to happen now is moving beyond simply tolerating others, those who are different from us in whatever way, into celebrating others. That doesn't mean we have to join them in the way that they do things. In fact, as we'll see later on in this scripture, that would defeat the whole purpose for why we're different. Diversity is necessary for a healthy body to operate and function. So the level of tolerating is simply saying, okay, so you have a right to exist. Celebrating is saying, good for you for supplying that part of the picture that I don't and that I can't. Thank you for doing a job that I'm not equipped to do, because I need you to do your job so that I can do mine. Okay, back to Ephesians, and I'm going back before I inserted my translation. I implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, celebrating, I'm going to add that part, one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. That's what we've been talking about all year long here at Spirit and Truth Sanctuary, pursuing peace. Now, you don't necessarily need to pursue peace with somebody who thinks just like you. The people you got to pursue peace with are the people that are doing something differently, or who believe differently, or who are behaving differently. There is one body and one Spirit. Now I'm going to insert here as well. There is one race, and of course, here we're referring to the human race. Just as also you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father, who is also a mother of us all, who is over all and through all and in all. So what does that remind you of? What we say around here, God in us, through us, and as us. In other words, we all came from the same place, are full of and made with the same stuff, but each one of us, to each one of us, grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. It says here. And these are the gifts that he gave. And he gave some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of service to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man or being, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness in deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body, being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. So the point is, we are all called and inspired to respond in a different way. The key is to do what you feel called to do and not judge what someone else feels called or inspired to do, because the body will indeed be made whole by what each joint supplies. We're not going to reach wholeness unless and until we each do our own individual job, until we each play our own role and stop trying to insist that everyone else respond the way we do and feel the way we feel and are inspired to do what we are inspired to do. However, one thing we can all do right now is to hold space for each other. Whatever role we've chosen to play, we need to learn to hold space for others as they play or perform their role. I want to end today by describing to you, and this might sound funny, but just stay with me, how society was structured in the Middle Ages under what was known as the feudal system. Now, there was a lot that was wrong about this system, and I'm glad we have now evolved beyond it. But there was also a certain beauty to the way that they divided up who would be responsible for what, and the higher octave of this system in its dream form was actually one of each social group holding space for others, and somehow they formed a team that functioned. It was known as the Three Estates, and I'm reading now. Feudal society was traditionally divided into 3 estates, roughly equivalent to what we would now define as social classes. The first estate was the church and its clergy, or those who prayed. Now, we could update that in modern day to anyone who devotes their life or who makes a living in a spiritual manner, providing spiritual service, monks, nuns, energy, or to be even more modern, energy workers, light workers, pastors, etc. All right, so this group of people is responsible for the spiritual well-being of the community. For instance, people who feel called to renounce money. Some people, they just want to live, they want to go live an ascetic life where they don't make any money. They just live off the goodness and the kindness of others. They live a stoic or a solitary life and spend most of their time in prayer or meditation. That's a level beyond just our individual personal meditation. There are people who feel called to do this for the good of and in service to the whole planet. We couldn't all live that way, or nothing practical would ever get done. There's got to be some people with money to support those people who want to do that, who feel called to do that. So, but these people have their place in society. They play their part. The second estate was the nobility, which included the knights or the warriors who fought. These were the people who provided physical protection and who ensured that the peace was kept between kingdoms and communities, and even down to the level of disputes between individuals. So in modern terms, we would include in this group the military, law enforcement, the judicial system. On the other side of that, though, it also includes those who push back against those institutions, those who protest, those who speak out, those who organize, activists, those who feel called to fight, to change things. And not everyone falls into that category. Not everyone is comfortable there, but some are, and we need them to be. The third estate was the peasantry, or basically everybody else. Those were the farmers and the merchants, etc. They produced the food, and they created and sold all the goods. So this system was considered symbiotic, or mutually beneficial, in that each estate provided something for the other two. For instance, the farmers grew the food that fed everyone. The knights protected everyone, and the clergy prayed for everyone and comforted them in their times of loss and cared for their souls. So it was this circle where everyone contributed what they felt called to contribute, and each contribution benefited everyone in the community. Now, it was not a perfect system for many reasons, not the least of which is you really didn't get to decide which class or estate you wanted to be in. You were just kind of born into one, and you were expected to stay there. There was no movement between them. Now, I know people are saying, well, how did the church reproduce? The priests weren't allowed to marry and have children. Well, each family pretty much decided which of their children they would send to be a priest or a nun. So this was an example of how people within a society can work together so that everyone gets what they need. So what role are you going to play in our society? What function are you going to perform in order to make a contribution to the whole? Are you a weaver, an experimenter, a frontline responder, a visionary, a builder, a caregiver, a disruptor, a healer, a storyteller, or a guide? Unlike the Middle Ages, what's better now is we do have the opportunity to choose which one of those things we're called to do. And we need each other. And we cannot afford to be divided. So, go team. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me today. Join us again tomorrow night at 6:30 for our continuing series, The Gift of Imperfection. And we will also see you on Sunday. I love you. Be at peace. Goodbye.